This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. Jason Bourne is back in Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Shadow by Brian Freeman, his fifth Jason Bourne novel. It's been over a decade since Nash Rollins recruited a brilliant, talented, but disaffected young man named David Webb to join Treadstone. Webb became the agent known as Cain and later took the identity of Jason Bourne. That violent winter, which included Kane's first mission for Treadstone, was also a story of betrayal in ways that David never knew. So, after the injury that erased Bourne's whole life, Nash lied about the circumstances of David's recruitment to Treadstone. He was afraid that learning the truth might drive Bourne out of the agency forever. But now, when Bourne meets a woman who recognizes him as David Webb, the secrets of those days begin to come out, and Bourne is forced to confront the dangerous ghosts of a past he doesn't even remember. Brian Freeman is the best selling author of over 25 novels, including the Jonathan Stride series and several popular standalones. His novel, Deep Snow, was an Edgar Award finalist, and his thriller, Spilled Blood, won the International Thriller Writers Award for Best Hardcover Novel. His books have been sold in 24 languages. Robert Ludlum was the author of 27 novels, each one a New York Times bestseller. There are more than 300 million of his books in print, and they have been translated into 32 languages. He was the author of the Scarlatti Inheritance, the Chancellor Manuscript, and the Jason Bourne series, of course, among other novels. Ludlum passed away back in March of 2001. Happy to have for the first time Brian Freeman on this podcast. Brian, welcome to this program.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
So, where did the idea for the Bourne Shadow come from?
Well, when you're talking about a long-running series like the Bourne series, and particularly one that has roots that go back more than 40 years, the Bourne Identity first came out all the way back in 1980. I feel like you have to kind of go to ground every few books and be able to, introduce new story arcs, new characters, and sort of invite new readers to the party. So, in my first four Bourne novels, it started with the Bourne Evolution, and then the Bourne Treachery, the Bourne Sacrifice, and the Bourne Defiance. I kind of, in the Bourne Defiance, I wrapped up a number of the story arcs that I'd been working on for the past several books. And so now in the Bourne Shadow, in my fifth book, it's in some ways kind of another reboot of the series. So I'm introducing new characters around Bourne, and I'm building up some new threads that we'll look at in the next few books. And the great thing about Jason Bourne as a character is that when you're talking about a hero who has lost his memory, essentially sort of lost his whole identity of who he is, not only does that make him an interesting character psychologically to work with, and it has so many elements that you can build on as a writer, but there's all sorts of great secrets that you can deal with in books, and I thought it was really about time to go back to Jason Bourne's roots as David Webb. And that was something that really we've never had dealt with in the whole Bourne series. And so this was an opportunity to kind of see, it's kind of an origin story, not for Bourne himself, but for that original person that he was before he became Bourne. And it gave me the chance to sort of, build in all sorts of wonderful conspiracies and lies and betrayal that is kind of the hallmark of the Bourne series.
I mentioned this is your fifth Jason Bourne novel. How did you get involved with this series?
Yeah, about 6 years ago, I got a call from my agent, and she told me that Putnam had acquired the rights to the Bourne series from the Ludlum estate, and they were looking for a new writer to take over the Bourne series. And was I interested in throwing my hat into the ring? And I've been a Ludlum fan my whole life. I grew up with his novels, The Bourne Identity, one of my all-time favorite books as I was growing up. So I said, sure, let's go for it. And it was kind of a black box after that. Nothing. I didn't really hear anything for about 4 or 5 months afterward. And this was a primo opportunity in the thriller world, so I assumed that they'd chosen to go another way, and there were probably dozens of writers going after this. But then I got another call from my agent, and she said, 5 words that will linger in my memory a long time. Putnam wants you for Bourne. So I called Tom Colgan, the editor at Putnam, and he'd been reading my earlier work and loved that. And he asked, what do you want to do with the Bourne series? And so I talked about the idea that when you've got a series that goes back so long, and there've been so many iterations of Bourne over the years, from the Ludlum books through the von Lussbader books, and of course the Matt Damon movies, that I didn't think you could really successfully build on the different visions of Bourne over the years. I said, what I'd like to do is go back to the Bourne identity, to Ludlum's original novel, and sort of be authentic to that character and lift that character up and drop him down into all new modern settings with all new characters and story arcs around him, and essentially do a full reboot of the series, so that readers that may not be familiar with Bourne can jump in and join us on the road. So that's what I've tried to do since the beginning.
Brian, what's been the feedback from the Ludlum family?
They have been so supportive. I really love that. They have been they've really encouraged me to take Bourne in some new directions, and to be able to draw on other elements of the Ludlum canon. In the Bourne Sacrifice, one of my favorite Ludlum books outside the Bourne series was the Chancellor manuscript. Just a fantastic book. I can remember reading it as a teenager, and so I proposed the idea of bringing the character of Peter Chancellor into the Bourne series, and using him as kind of a focal point of the Bourne Sacrifice, and they loved that idea, and so Peter Chancellor became an important part of that book. And I can still remember when I turned in my first one, the Bourne Evolution, and Putnam passed it along to the estate. They came back and said, "We don't want to change a word. We think it's perfect." So that's a high honor for me.
Your pacing is a key element in an action thriller. Has been described by Booklist as being impeccable. How did you develop that style?
Well, this is my 29th book with the Born Shadow. So I've been at this for 20 years, and I've developed kind of a process for pace on a few different levels. One is that I never want to get between the reader and the story, or the reader and the characters, and so if there's great prose that is not advancing the story, even if it's great words, I want to be, I want to kind of zap it out when I'm in the editing process. I want to keep the story moving along, and I want the characters talking directly to the reader, and I want every paragraph advancing the story. The other thing is I'm always thinking about how the action unfolds, and I always want there to be some sort of hook or twist at the end of each chapter that sort of forces the reader to turn the page and find out what happens next. And as a result, it kind of creates a propulsive pace of its own, and forces you to keep moving through the narrative.
Did you always want to become a writer?
Yeah, I'm one of those people that this has been my dream as far back as I can remember. I can still remember sitting in sixth grade class working on my first mystery novel. So yeah, someone asked me, when did you ever think of yourself as a writer? And I said, honestly, I've never thought of myself as anything else. This has always been what I've wanted to do.
What was the most exciting part, not to give away too much, of writing this story?
Oh, well, it's I love using different settings to kind of bring out the drama. And one of the greatest places that my wife and I have visited was a little place in the UK called Holy Island, just off the Northumberland coast. It's separated by a causeway that floods at high tide, and I've always thought that was such a great dramatic setting. There's a castle on a hill, and a ruined abbey, and I thought, I've always wanted to be able to find a way to use that as a setting in a book. And so the climax of the Born Shadow takes place out on Holy Island. So it was a lot of fun putting together those scenes, and bringing all sorts of terrible violence to this beautiful place.
Brian, what's the best thing about being an author?
The best thing, honestly, is hearing from readers. I love getting feedback from readers, whether it's on email or Facebook posts or Twitter posts, whatever it might be. As writers, you're not just working for yourself. I mean, you're in it to be able to give an experience to the readers and to sort of immerse them in a whole other world. So I just love the feedback I get from readers. That's the kind of thing that gets you up every morning staring at that blank screen.
What moves you most in a work of literature?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it sounds strange for a thriller writer to say, but honestly, if a book or a story or a character can move me to tears, I always feel like that's the most authentic and honest reaction you can get from readers. And in my own books, I do very emotional psychological thrillers, and as I'm getting toward the end, I've got tears running down my face, and I always feel if I can get that intimately connected to the characters, then hopefully the readers will as well. But it's that intensity of emotion. I mean, it's you always want a great story. You always want great action and twists and the fun that goes along with that. But you also want the readers to just get, so involved in the stories of the characters that they really feel an emotional connection to them.
What genres do you enjoy reading?
Oh, I used to be such a big mystery thriller fan myself, and I think probably the only downside of breaking through as a writer is that it's kind of hard to curl up with somebody else's thriller at the end of the day when you've been writing suspense all day long, because it sort of feels like work at that point. It ends up being market research rather than entertainment. So you look at it and go, oh, I like that. I think I would have done that differently. Oh, I see where he's going with that. So I ultimately made the decision a while back that most of the time I end up doing something completely different. So I read a lot of nonfiction, history, memoirs, autobiographies, biographies, that kind of thing.
Are you hard at work on another novel? And if so, can you give us a sneak peek into what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a couple more things coming soon. My new standalone thriller, Break Every Rule, will be coming out from Blackstone Books on September 10th. Can't wait to have that one in readers' hands. Jason Bourne is already back in 6 more months in January in The Bourne Vendetta. That'll be my 6th Bourne novel. And then I'm in the home stretch of another standalone mystery called Photograph. That'll be out from Blackstone next year. So everybody's keeping me hopping.
Yeah, he's got a lot going on. Brian Freeman, his new one to enjoy for the remainder of the summer is Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Shadow. It is out now, and you can connect online with Brian Freeman. He has a website, bfreemanbooks, all one word, .com. Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast.